One of the things I like to do in my HBS classroom is try to intimidate the students by starting a minute early. And then when they walk in and they say, "Oh my God, am I late?" and they get all nervous and flustered. So I shut the door 1 minute before class starts, and it only has to happen once or twice, and then it never happens for the rest of the semester. So anyway, welcome everybody. I'm Jeff Bussgang. I'm a senior lecturer here at HBS. I teach in the second year, and I'll tell you a little bit about what I teach. But I'm really excited to have you in this session to talk about custom GPTs and really talking about taking some of these tools and applying them in the classroom. And I'll talk about how we've applied them in the classroom in the last year. But one of the things I'm really struck by is how fast this is moving. And my thinking about how to apply these tools in the classroom changes quite rapidly. So what I did in the fall semester, I made a number of modifications on the context of the spring semester, and I'm already thinking ahead about what I'm going to do next fall. And I want to try to give you a little bit of a preview into all of that. So I'm going to take you a little bit on a journey of, gosh, you guys are late. It's 1:30. So I'll take you on a little bit of a journey as to how my thinking has evolved in taking this information in the classroom. And I'll just say a little bit about myself by way of introduction for context, and then we'll dive right in. And I've left a lot of time for Q&A, right? Because you don't need to be spoken at. We already did enough of that at Klarman. So I've got probably 20 or what could be 20 or 30 minutes of content to cover in the hour, therefore leaving a lot of time for dialogue. And please feel free to ask me questions at any point along the way. We've got a nice small group, we've got a good setting, and we can have a lot of dialogue. So briefly about me, I was class of 91 college computer science. Believe it or not, I studied AI in the late 1980s. That was what we did over on the other side of the river. It was called neural networks and expert systems back in the day, and natural language processing. I then did a couple years at BCG to learn PowerPoint, and then came back here to HBS and graduated in '95. And in 1995, I joined an internet startup. I was very excited about the first wave of the internet, and I have reflected back on the last 30 years and just think about how lucky I am that I was able to start my career in that Internet 1.0 era, and now at this point in my career see this amazing, AI era. So I did 2 internet startups. The first one went public in the mid-1990s, was quite successful. And the second one was sold successfully. Both were venture-backed. And about 22 years ago, I co-founded a venture capital firm with a couple of friends who had been previously my investors. So I co-founded a firm called Flybridge Capital, and that's really my main vocation and has been for the last couple of decades. And because of my technical background, I've been investing in AI companies for over 10, 15 years. The firm, a couple years ago, became exclusively focused on AI investing. So my day job is to invest in these AI software companies, and I'll talk a little bit about maybe how this applied work in the classroom reflects on my investment work. But about 13 years ago, I joined the HBS faculty part-time, and I teach here in the EC, the elective curriculum, and I teach 2 courses. And this will become relevant when I tell you about some of the work that I did. The first course is called Launching Tech Ventures, LTV, and that's a course focused on pre-product market fit startups. It's all about going from 0 to 1. A couple of people in this room were in that class over the years, and I've taught that to about 2,000 students over the 14 years that I've taught that course. We now have 3 sections, about 250, 300 students in that class. The second course I teach is called Venture Capital Journey, and that's a more narrow community of 30 students who aspire to become venture capitalists after graduation. Every year we have about 30 or 40 students who go into venture capital jobs after graduating right out of HBS. So that's the other course I teach. And I give you this background because when I describe what I did in the fall, which was for my LTV class, and then some of the things I did in my spring BCJ class, that context will be relevant. So that's a bit about me. I've written a couple books, and I'm actually in the middle of writing a 3rd book about the impact of AI on product market fit. So it's called The Experimentation Machine, Finding Product Market Fit in the Age of AI. And Ethan talked about it a little bit today about sort of this impact that AI is having on the tool set to be more efficient and effective as a founder. And I've been studying this for a long time, both in my portfolio as I watch my software companies leveraging AI to be more effective in their product market fit journey, but then also in the classroom as I've been coaching my students on how to use the AI tools to be more effective. And so that's going to be the focus of this book that I'm midway through writing. And as part of the writing of the book, it's been really quite interesting because it's a sort of incredible challenge, frankly, of trying to write about something that's moving so quickly. And so somebody has asked, invariably asks me, like, how do you write a book to talk about a tool set that's going to be out of date in a year or 2 years? And I don't have a great answer for that. Maybe you'll help me with that.
Designed obsolescence.
Designed obsolescence. The best I can do is that I'm trying to kind of capture timeless frameworks and describe timely tools, recognizing that the tools will change and evolve. So the tool you may use now to develop a user persona, an AI user persona that you might do customer discovery with in a dynamic fashion might be different than a year or two from now. But that whole notion of doing customer discovery with an AI persona is something that is relatively timeless. Actually, I'm thrilled that Scott Cook is here. I'm going to just embarrass you, Scott, a little bit, if I may. Founder of Intuit, they created this incredible program, Follow Me Home, which I talk about in my classroom. And actually, can I cold call you? I shouldn't talk about the program because you sort of invented this program of really getting to the empathetic view of the customer by following the customer home as they opened up the software that you put on the shelf back then in the retail shelves. So maybe just say a minute about that program, and I'm going to give you the AI version 40 years later.
Yeah, I'd be interested to hear. Early on, we all did tech support, so all of us and all the engineers had to do at least for 3 hours a month to handle tech support calls. And even though we'd done in-house testing, we'd done usability, what's now called usability testing, we'd seen lots of customers start up and use our product, which at the point was Quicken. There was something in the calls that was different. It sounded like there were things they didn't seem to understand that we had seen them in our own usability lab understand. So I decided we probably need to go and watch it in reality as opposed to watch it in our lab and see them in their real environment, take their own finances. And so we got a local software store to pass out a flyer whenever they sold a box of our software saying, hey, we'd like to come to your place and watch you take the program off the box and start up the experience. And oh my God, we saw tons of stuff we never saw in the more artificial environment of bringing customers into our building. The reality is just different. And the reality when you're doing things with your own finances, your own money. And so that we call Follow Me Home testing. And we do it now to learn. If we're looking at a new product area or a new feature area, go watch real people do the real thing and just watch. Not an interview, not a survey, just watch.
Right.
And it turns out we didn't know this at the time, but there's a long tradition of that from the Toyota production system. They call it Gemba. There's a prominent production line. Just they have the leader go, don't depend on reports, don't read reports, don't listen, just go to that part of the line, stand there and watch. So we now do that internally as well, inspired by Toyota on our own internal production processes.
Very cool. So this concept I talk a lot about actually in my class of customer intimacy and watching your customers actually use your product and don't make assumptions. And then you think about, well, can AI synthetically enable some of these capabilities? Like, could you train the AI to act like a user persona and to describe your prototypical customer, your ideal customer profile, and infuse it with some life? Just like Marketing Mary was infused with life by HubSpot very famously when they described that persona and put that persona all over their offices and conference rooms. And then could you really engage and have your engineers engage with that user persona synthetically as a way to get maybe 50% of the value, not 100% of the value, maybe 30% of the value. And as the AI gets better, maybe it delivers 70% of the value or 80% of the value, because you can't obviously have every single one of your employees follow every single one of your customers home, but you can have them all engage with an AI that mimics and embodies your customer profile, your ideal customer profile. So it's that sort of like thinking that I'm trying to push our founders, both in my portfolio and in our classroom, to think about using the AI to really leverage their journey of finding product market fit of every step of the journey, from customer discovery and to ideation, to designing experiments, to customer discovery, to trying to find the pain and the value propositions, to testing those value propositions, to developing prototypes, to developing personas, so on and so forth. So that's sort of some of the work that I'm doing in the classroom. So to bring this to life in the classroom, I also wanted to try to bring some of our pedagogy to life. And so I was one of those rare people that when OpenAI came out with its API, roughly a year ago, actually today, I got really excited and thought about, well, only a nerd would get excited about an API release. What could I do with this platform in the classroom? And I decided to create a personalized faculty co-pilot that I would bring into the classroom with me for my fall class. So I'll talk about what that looks like, and I call that Chat LTV. So LTV is the course name, Chat LTV is the chatbot, that's the faculty co-pilot trained on the course content, and I'll show you how that was done. And then the second thing I saw was that when OpenAI came out with the custom GPT functionality, which was in November, so towards the end of the fall semester, and today you can create, using this no-code environment, custom GPTs, as many as you want. I decided to start creating custom GPTs to create feedback, personalized feedback for our students based on their submissions. And I'll describe what that looks like in a minute. When I showed this to the faculty in December, Kareem and Shrikant were so excited, they said it's maybe the first time in the history of Harvard Business School that students got feedback on their submissions. Think about it, like, we never give feedback. Like, by the end of the semester, we give a 1, a 2, or a 3. You never get anything else in this classroom, in this environment. You pay a lot of money for this environment. So it'd be nice to get a little feedback, even from an AI bot. So anyway, so that's what I did. So let me tell you about Chat LTV. So Chat LTV is a Slack bot, and I'll tell you why I use Slack in a minute, that was embedded in the course Slack, publicly available to our students through 2 channels that was available. One was publicly available, meaning that they could post in a Slack channel that everybody would see in the classroom, and again, 250 students, 3 sections, or privately available as a one-on-one, effectively tutor in an app that they would just have they and the faculty being able to see. And that was in an app embedded in the chat, in the Slack app store. And the reason that I did Slack is because I use Slack in the classroom. And so the students have assignments in Slack. They're asked to post their reflections after class in Slack. They live in Slack. And when you think about creating new products and you think about interfaces, you have 2 choices, generally speaking. One is create a new interface and ask people to come to that. And the second is embed yourself in an existing interface where the students already, in this case, students already are living. And I decided to do the latter because I wanted to really be where the students were. I didn't want to force them to go to a new interface. So being embedded in the Slack ended up being a quite fortuitous strategic choice. And as you all think about your own applications that you're deploying, thinking about going where your user is as opposed to forcing them to come to a new application is something worth considering. And then this other thing that's quite important on this is that I built the content corpus and trained it only on my corpus. So Chat LTV was only trained on my books, my 50 or so HBS case studies, a couple selected blogs, teaching notes, etc. But it was not allowed to know anything outside of that corpus. If you asked it any question about who's Donald Trump, or who's gonna, who won the World Series last year, whatever, it would have no idea how to answer that question. It only knew content that I trained it on that was only ring-fenced around my course. That was important, I thought, because students can go to ChatGPT or any of the other open, platforms and get answers to a lot of generic questions. But I wanted them to only come here to be able to get answers to questions related to the course. And as those of you who have been through the HBS curriculum, you know that the day of the case, all you as a student think about is that case. Like for those 80 minutes, that case is the totality of your focus. And so I wanted the students to be able to inquire about the cases and about the questions that we would be discussing in the classroom, because the key thing was to force them to prepare using the chatbot for the classroom conversation. So we had about as I said, 250 students. It ended up being quite successful. We had over 3,000 queries over the course of the semester. So we launched it at the beginning of the semester and after Labor Day. So we developed it over the summer, launched it after Labor Day, ran it through the semester in the fall, and as I said, had really quite good success. This is the quick architecture, and then I'm going to show you a little bit like behind the scenes, because there was one insight I didn't fully appreciate. I thought I was going to give the students a powerful tool. I didn't realize that I was giving myself, as a faculty member, a powerful tool until I actually did it. So the architecture, very quickly, we had a front end, which was mainly a content management system to ingest the cases and the books and the other content. And that had a great deal of flexibility because I wanted to be able to add new pieces of content or new cases as they were developed. And then a back end, which was the Slack API integration, and then some of the key indexing and content management. One of the key architectural things that we did, and this was last summer, it's now very standard, but if you don't know about RAG, you should learn about it. It's the way in which you are able to train the GPT on the content chunks that you specifically want it to react to. So the way this works is that I would use the OpenAPI API, as you can see here, to go out to the, first I would go through the vector database of where all the content was stored, and I would pull out the content chunks relevant to the query. So if the question was about a particular case, it would go into the content database, pull out the chunks of content relevant to that case and to the question being asked of that case. And then it would take those content chunks and then apply them to the OpenAI API to ask the particular question and get the answer. So that's the way that the RAG architecture works. It's becoming a very standard way for people to avoid hallucinations and improve relevancy of the queries and answers from the chatbot. And then I didn't do any model fine tuning. So there was no like hardcore model adjustments that could be done in the future. It was really just using the standard API, the case library that I had already developed, and then pulling those together in this architecture and infusing it into the chatbot. So as I said, I thought I was giving the students a cool tool, but I actually was giving myself this really gift of being able to see in the minds of the students before I'd walk into the classroom. I called it student observability. So every morning before I walked in the classroom, I would log on to the admin portal in the system, and I would say, what are the students asking about? And I would get the opportunity to see, like, what are the students asking about? And I would have the ability to look by student as well as by time. So I could look up any given student. This is a particular student who's asking a lot of questions about this is an example of, I was saying this to somebody else before. So one of the things in our classroom, you can see the extrovert students very obviously, right? They're raising their hand a lot. They're in your face. They're always sharing what they know. They want to jump in on the case. Some of them are gunning for honors and Baker or whatever else in the second year. But the introverted students are the ones you have a harder time knowing what's going on. So this particular student, just by way of example, is a young woman from Southeast Asia. English is a second language. And she had come from a unicorn tech startup in Southeast Asia. So I knew she was familiar with the general domain, but she was very quiet in the classroom. But one morning when I logged on, I saw that she was asking a sequence of questions that were incredibly thoughtful questions about this case. This case is a SaaS company called Sprout. You know, what are your key takeaways from the case? How can they grow their top line? What are their risks? Something about it's an SMB company for HR. You know, how do they think about that? Strengths and weaknesses. So she's really querying the chatbot about the case. So I know walking in, she's totally prepared. So who do you think I cold called that morning? This young woman, because I knew she was going to nail the cold call, which she did. So and I had this observability opportunity just by seeing how she was interacting with the chatbot before the classroom. So another example, this is a student who came from a Fortune 500 company. She was an IT person, so she knew the technology, but she was very unfamiliar with the terminology of startup land. And that showed in her queries. What's OTE, what's CPI, what's inside sales? There's a bunch of basic terminology that she's struggling with. So that gave me clarity into understanding that maybe she, like other students, are struggling with some of the terminology and some of the acronyms. So I asked ChatLTV, give me the top 15 acronyms that my students should be learning about, and explain them in the Slack. And so here's 15 good summary acronyms that I use in the classroom all the time. I also asked them to tell some jokes about the acronyms and try to make them, memorable. That went okay. It's about, as you all know, it's about as good as dad joke level. But it still was fun to play around with. Another student, and I saw this pattern frequently. As many times as you think as a faculty, you're sharing, important information about the course and the requirements and the grading and when assignments are due. And you think if you say it once, you're done. Like everyone, sometimes students don't hear you the first time. Sometimes they need to hear it multiple times. So I would get these inquiries like, what are the guidelines for the project? I told you that in the second class, and I posted it already. What's the assignment that we need to post in the Slack? Again, I told you that. How can I schedule office hours with Jeff? Email me, like it's so obvious. But they keep asking admin questions. And so I decided to create an admin content repository, and I trained the chatbot on the admin content so that anytime students would ask admin content, the chatbot would be able to give the correct answer. So you can see sort of this was both a learning mechanism for me as well as for the students by having this insight into how they used it. So a common fear that my faculty colleagues had when I told them I was going to do this was, what's the obvious fear you would have as a faculty?
You have nothing. They're not going to read the case.
Yeah, say it again.
They're not going to read the case.
They're not going to read the case, right? They're going to ask the chatbot, summarize the case for me. What were you going to say?
Yeah, it was that, and you're kind of putting yourself out of a job a little bit. Like they're going to learn from the AI, they're going to want to interact with the AI rather than
what do they need me for? Right.
Or one another even. Like so much of the learning in the cases is
It's
like
from the dialogue. Yeah.
I teach at Columbia Business School, and they wanted to kind of get us up to speed on this. And one of the things they said there from kind of their internal pilots was that almost everyone submits later than they would have. But what you get is the students who wouldn't have done the work anyway are using AI to do the work. So like the bottom 25 to 30% of the class gets a lot more out of the class.
Yeah, this is interesting. So this is what I can't tell you scientifically what happened, but I would tell you anecdotally, I felt students came in very well prepared. They did read the case. They asked the chatbot questions, often the assignment questions that I would post, they would ask the chatbot. But the cool thing about, and I do think there might have been some students who might have skipped the class, so to speak, who showed up and maybe interacted with the chatbot and got the summary and maybe, allowed them to kind of enter into the conversation, like the bottom 20%, as you said, or 10%. In my class, very few of that. But maybe in other classes that would happen. But what I did notice was, like, this is the beauty of the case method, which is, like, you can't just give a case back in a case conversation. Like, if Heb gives me a case back, I'm going to be all over him. Like, okay, Heb, like, great. What would you actually do? Why do you believe that? What would be your next step? What's your action plan? And it's not like they can fumble around with their laptops and with their, printouts. Like, you have to have a conversation, as you said, with your fellow students. And then I would say, tell me your name.
Trevor.
Trevor, I would say, Trevor, do you agree with Heb? And it's like, boom, now we're having a debate. Mm-hmm. So, like, that's good case facilitation. So I think my conclusion was that the chatbot is a way of advancing the prep of the students, but it forces the faculty to be better at pushing forward the real case conversation and debate to get to the salient issues and really surface the tough questions. And I found that to be quite effective in doing that. We got right into the heart of the issues. The students had prepared, they had pre-processed, they had thought about it, they had used the chatbot gave them, it's non-deterministic, like it's not always right, because it doesn't give like the right answer all the time. You have to sort of debate it. And this is startups, like there's no right answer. right? Like it's incredibly subjective and very debatable, every decision that a founder makes. So that's how I found the power and the use of the chatbot. It was really quite helpful. And then the other thing is introverts, superpower for the introverts, and a superpower for me to see the introverts. And then also just this funny thing of like, I think I'm always available to my students, but I would go to bed at like 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock. I'd go offline, and I'd say, God, nobody's really using the chatbot today. I wonder if something's wrong, or maybe they're not going to be very engaged. And then I'd come, get back online at 6 or 7 in the morning, and there'd be like 30 queries that happen between 10 or 11 at night and like 2 or 3 in the morning. So it's another sort of lesson of when prep happens, and like for faculty to be ready to be dynamic and being responsive to students and having the leverage of the AI to help you in that responsiveness can be quite helpful. So what's next? So I took my course, LTV, Launching Tech Ventures, online, and we launched that last year. And so as part of HBS Online, it's an available online course. And so we've decided to create a tutor bot for the online course. So this is something that's happening now throughout HBS Online courses. And so launching next week will be a tutor bot for the next cohort of the HBS Online course, where you can have it exposed to the thousands of students that take the online course, and where they can ask questions, and it'll have context for where they are in the course when it answers those questions. The other thing that we did in the architecture is that it goes outside, not just the corpus of content related to the course, but with some guardrails, it will go outside to the generic chatbots, because I think something's going to happen. Because I'm not going to be present, so to speak, I wanted to have even more faculty like coverage, right? Which is what the generic chatbot can give. If somebody asks a question about, what's a good, how do you evaluate a good startup idea, or how do investors evaluate founders in terms of founder market fit? If I don't have that answer in my content corpus, it's pretty likely that ChatGPT will. And so blending the best of the corpus and the public chatbot is something we're going to experiment with this next rev of the system. Yeah.
That's only one quick question that comes to my mind. So since you opened the platform before the case, I presume, so people are typing in the questions or the concerns. So what I'm hearing with is now that gives me time. For example, if I'm sitting in the classroom, they're putting me on the spot. So that ambiguity part of it, which is required, that you deal with the situation as it comes, is a little bit taken away, because now I know the surrounding other questions coming or
Right.
helping the case.
It's a great question. So it's part of the faculty's obligation to create some of that ambiguity and uncertainty in the questions and the queries, I think. Like if you only follow exactly the assignment questions, you're not doing, I think, a good job as a faculty member. You also want to dynamically, as everyone knows, when you're doing the case method, you want to go where the conversation is going. You don't want to just be like, oh, it's 15 minutes with that pastor, now I got to go to the next pastor, let me ask my second question, which I sent to you the night before and all of you put into the chat box so you know what the answer is. Like, that's not how you teach, right? You've got to dynamically have it be an organic evaluative conversation. Again, it puts more of a burden though on the faculty to be dynamic, to listen carefully to the students, to go where the conversation is going.
You had mentioned earlier about how you were able to recognize that lifted the bottom 10, 15% up into closer to the mean. Were you able to get any feedback on what it did for the top 5 or 10%? Did it push them into deeper insight?
It was her comment about the bottom 20% from the Columbia. I felt like
In your experience?
In my experience, I felt like everybody stepped up. I thought we generally had richer case conversations, and including the top.
Okay,
At the top.
thank you.
Yeah.
How did you go through fine tuning at this point, the bot?
No.
When it was going out with third-party sources?
Okay, so I should clarify. So we did a lot of content evaluation and content testing, both when it was just my corpus and then also with this. Not model fine tuning, meaning not changing the weights of the model, but we would do a lot of testing to improve like the prompts or the structure of the retrieval, sort of algorithms. So it would be more considered prompt engineering than fine tuning, to be precise.
And what is that nuance that's, because I talk with a lot of developers, I'm trying to learn their language. How do you define these and what do you think is
So
most?
OpenAI has a model.
System.
So their model has been trained with certain weights based on certain, let's say, language, links that they make between concepts and languages. I don't change that model. If you're American Express and you're building a fraud model, you might change that model because you understand very particularly your application is going to have a certain weighting that you would want. But I don't change that model for the purposes of this exercise.
Okay.
I might play around with the prompts.
Okay.
I might change the content, but I don't change the model weighting.
Got it, okay.
You showcased some numbers about when people were activating and using this during the Slack channel, the 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. Did you notice any activity during the case itself?
No, and in part because I have a no device policy, and if I catch you on your device, I will do one of two things. I will do this. It's going to get awkward. Or I'll send you a note after class, and I'll say, my policy, I saw you on your device, don't do it again.
Would you consider relaxing that? Or we all heard about it. It's our new colleague, right? Not just at 10 a.m.
Early on when Twitter came out, back when Twitter was fun and novel and interesting, I don't know if Allison, I did this in your class. Do you remember, did I do a live tweet in your class? So one of the classes I said, everybody have your laptops for this class. We're going to live tweet during class. So I want everybody to engage in the class conversation, and I want you to tweet in the middle of class, just to have to see the experiment. And it was like can you multitask, and what would come from the Twitter streams from the students. So it was a fun exercise. I might try it once with this as well for one class. I wouldn't do it for every class though.
Just a little bit about, this is sort of a dream tool for teachers. Can you talk a little bit about how difficult this is? I mean, you said you put it together on Slack, and how difficult is it to create something like this? And is something like this scalable? And people leaving this class create their own teaching bots.
Yeah, it's incredible how fast the tools are getting and how easy they are. So this took one engineer 3 months, I'll say pretty minor in terms of the general heavy lift, and that was a year ago. Today you could do it on your own. Yeah. So there are tools, there are a bunch of no-code tools out there, like Custom GPT is one example of a no-code tool that you can use, and you can throw in a bunch of documents, create a custom chatbot, and it'll take you a couple hours. And I'm going to show you the custom GPTs that I created for personalized evaluators that I can do these in 5 or 10 minutes.
I lead a customer service team at GoDaddy, and one of the things we're struggling with is we have custom GPT in-house, and we're using the open sources, trying to decide economically which open source to use when is a real struggle. Is it worth the 80% versus 60% accuracy in this instance? How do you know?
Yeah.
How are you using some form of criteria to decide what open sources you're using in your tutor model?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I only have 300 students, so I have a much smaller universe to work with. One of the things that I observed in my investment activities, we invested in a company called RC that's doing specialized or small language models, or SLMs, that's addressing this exact issue, which is that most corporations don't want to pay the money for these massive models, which are so crazy expensive to run and manage. And so they want specialized language models. And RC is one company that's doing that. There are others. We think they're the best one. But that's sort of the wave of the future, which is compressing the cost for enterprises dramatically.
Just so we basically do a version of this, but for enterprises. And so what we see is the RAG cost differential between, RAG is phenomenal, and this is the architecture that Jeff talked about, because you're not actually relying on the LLM to do most of the work. You're actually relying on a vector database, and then that generates the relevant context. And that's a problem that's been around for a while. It's much cheaper to do. Fine-tuning a model gets very expensive. So doing it on your own model and changing that, and it also has certain downsides, like it has to be very fresh, whereas RAG can be updated almost instantaneously. So I guess for enterprise use cases, we found RAG to be very cost-effective.
Yeah. Yeah.
Are you testing
the accuracy of what you're getting. We're using it in a private equity context, and the accuracy is really important. Like, we don't want false positives.
Yes.
So we are using like a bunch of humans to look at it, but it's not just a simple. The ground truth is not a simple yes or no. It's a semantic answer you're looking for.
Yeah. This is a great point. I had, these models are non-deterministic, and they're not good at math. And my class is fairly analytical. So I'll ask people unit economics, LTV to CAC ratios, what IRR would you, put on this? Would an investor invest in this? Why would they invest or not invest? It'd be similar questions to what you would ask in a private equity context, a little more kind of early stage flavor. And the Chat LTV did a pretty poor job of answering those questions. Students had to do the work themselves to get the ground truth on those answers. Now, these models are getting better. So GPT-5 is going to be better at math. GPT-6 will be even better at math. So a little bit of this is a moving target, but it was really interesting to watch the students struggle with, and like we had one interaction where I said, okay, well, what's the LTV to CAC ratio? And the student gave an answer. And I said, how'd you come up with that? And she said, well, Chat LTV came up with that. And I said, well, no, but how did you come up with that? And that, here's my other point about like pushing students on the answers. Like, what's the ground truth? How do we know that? And like, let's walk through it step by step and do first principles. I'll go here and then here.
Sorry, not to talk twice, but the other thing is you can, with certain applications, get to the underlying source material very quickly. So that's typically what we see is if you're showing the exact location in the paragraph of the SEC filing where this is contained, being able to click on that lets you self-serve, getting to that. And that's really where we've seen a lot of uptake there.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'll be curious to know because in India, there's a lot of Tamil literature which is 2,000 years old. A lot of people have, through crowdsourcing, they've digitized it and typed it in as HTML and PDF form. So I built a platform called Orality, which is for bringing those PDFs into a mobile version. So my question would be, how easy it is without a lot of coding and things like that
to ingest that
to
content.
ingest that content, because I want to ask a question. What did somebody in the 12th century talked about romance? Then the system needs to come up with, this is exactly the verse of the couplet that was said.
Exactly. The systems are incredibly good at doing that right now.
And this is something you have developed or is up in the market? Like
both, like custom GPT and let me show you the custom GPTs.
Sure.
And then
Sorry for jumping in.
No, this is great. So that was the coach in the fall. And I told you a little bit where the coach is going. Let me tell you about the personalized tutors. So in November, OpenAI came out with custom GPTs. There are also companies doing custom GPTs. So there's like literally a company called Custom GPT. And then there are other amazingly got the trademark. And then there are other companies that are doing things like that. But if you look in the standard GPT Pro, for those of you who subscribe, $20 a month. I'm not selling it, but there's a custom GPT capability. And if you go to the custom GPT, you can train it on anything you want. And so when my students submitted their end of semester projects, I decided I would train a custom GPT on evaluating and grading their projects. So you can imagine 250 submissions, a lot for any faculty to review and grade. And as I said, most times, no faculty like writes an essay back to their student to give them feedback on their submission. But I did. I created this custom academic assistant to review LTV papers. I trained it on previous year's strongest papers, gave it the project description, gave it the grading rubric, and asked it to be critical of both the final project paper as well as the startup idea. One of the things I've noticed with GPTs is that they're too nice. So one of my prompts I always have to add at the end is, be critical. This is a very rigorous course with very high standards. And so otherwise the GPT is way too nice. And then I say, like, give me the 3 things you liked and the 3 things you didn't like about this submission. And then in the spring, when I did venture capital journey, I did it for every single assignment. So every week or two, students are submitting assignments to me. I created a custom GPT per assignment. So this was one on an investment thesis. The students had to come up with an investment thesis, and I created an investment thesis evaluator I trained it on the best investment thesis blog posts that are out there from other venture capital firms, and then created this GPT to give them feedback. And I said, give me 3 things you like, 3 things you don't like, and give it an overall grade. So this is an example of a particular investment thesis submission on designing on AI innovation in UI UX tools. Here are the 3 things the AI liked. Here are the 3 things that could be improved. And then I sent each of these to each of my students. So on the final project, 250 emails went out from me that look like this. On each of these submissions, every week when they do a submission, I would run it through the custom grader that I created, and then I would send out what the custom grader would say in terms of feedback.
Did they know it was a tutor or no?
Yeah, I would say to them, I gave them the prompt. I said, this is what I've done. I said, I'm going to grade it, but I want you to know, like, this is the prompt, this is the tutor, here's the URL if you want to play with the custom GPT, because you can make these public. And here's what the results were of what they thought of your essay.
So, I mean, did your grade agree with the grade from?
Most of 70% of the time. I was just pointing out, for grading, you want it to be 100% accurate. So I thought the actual grade was that I find that the grade of the GPT is too easily fooled by length and maybe better language and not like really good conceptual insights necessarily. So as I said, I graded everything, but I wanted the students to see what the GPT reacted to and the prompt. I gave them the full transparent chain, so to speak.
Separate from the grade, how was the quality of the feedback and coaching that?
Very good. Students found the feedback to be very good. Now, part of it is because I have a rubric and I train this is what a good investment thesis looks like. This is what a good project looks like. This is what a good investment memo looks like. And so if they didn't follow the rubric, the grader was quite good at giving feedback on, you're not following the rubric, you didn't do this enough, or you didn't do that enough.
So is it optimizing for following the framework or for coming up with a great idea?
It definitely is not.
If you have a bad idea, follow the framework.
It's definitely not necessarily good idea or bad idea. Like, I wouldn't say you would use the evaluator to make investment decisions, although I've been playing around with that in our firm. So it's like, as a quick sidebar on that. So an associate and I wrote an investment memo this last week on a follow-on investment that we're making in one of our portfolio companies. And I have been playing around with an investment memo evaluator, because that's one of my assignments for my class. And so I modified it to see how well it would do in evaluating my investment memo. And what I decided to do was red team, blue team. So as I said, it's oftentimes in an investment committee, you have a lot of groupthink and everybody gets excited. Everybody says, let's do this. And you don't really think deeply about the alternative, kind of reality. So the red team version is, I said, here's the investment memo. I want you to review this very critically and then come back to me and tell me all the reasons why we should not make this investment. Be as detailed as possible. Give me the specifics as to why we should not make this investment. And that was really quite effective because it forced our thinking as a team about, okay, like, here are the risks, and let's really synthesize and amplify the risks and try to talk us out of it, and then see if we can still talk ourselves into it. So playing the devil's advocate, it's quite good at, as opposed to coming up with the actual investment idea or thesis.
Jeff? A quick history lesson. I'm curious about the scalability of all this, particularly when it comes to the average faculty member. In 1983, I had a small company that was training executives on the new PCs that came out. And we used a technique called the electronic case method, which is basically porting something familiar into the new environment. And my experience was that the faculty did not uniformly respond well to innovation or new technology. And it was not just about one exposure, but it took a while before people were comfortable. So I'm curious, for all this, it looks fabulous, and it looks like it'd be a lot to hoist aboard on a new faculty member. But what kind of response is the faculty giving to your innovation?
Yeah, I would say is everybody here on the faculty? I would say it's been incredibly positive.
Great.
So they asked me to present this at 2 different faculty gatherings. One that was call it a tech-focused or AI-focused one that was self-selecting, and one was to the entire faculty. And I had a ton of inquiries afterwards about people wanting to use this in the classroom. People saw at the beginning of the day today, if you were here, Mitch Weiss and Kareem and Sadal have been very active in trying to push AI usage into the faculty hands. So I think like not everybody is adopting it or embracing it perfectly, but I would say the school is doing a pretty darn good job. And a lot of the faculty, they recognize that the students are ahead of them. If they're not careful, they're gonna sort of lose the kind of respect and focus of the students.
That's an incentive.
So yeah, it's a good incentive. Yeah, they want to be relevant, right? Okay. I want to show one more thing, but yeah.
So Jeff, I'm gonna ask this in as polite a way as I can. But if you really ladder this forward in the way that we heard this morning, you'll be dealing with AI that is probably the common denominator will be the AI is better than your best student. You put a case in, it's going to come up with even connections that are better than the best student can come up with. So I'm wondering, how does education change here when the table stakes are that your AI companion is going to be better than your best student in the class? What are we going to be teaching, and how are we going to be teaching that so that they can take advantage of a tool that is literally, kind of changing the game in terms of what?
And it's happening in real time. Let me kind of answer your question with this slide, and then what I'm framing next as I'm thinking about next fall, is that my assignment is for students to create an AI co-founder over the course of the semester, even the course of the first few weeks. And the assignment's going to be like a multi-step process. And I'm workshopping this a little bit in real time, so I love your feedback, and then I want to come back to your question. So this year I had their first assignment be use ChatGPT to come up with a startup idea, and then come up with a series of experiments to test that idea, and then tell me your reflection on how good ChatGPT was at doing that. So that was my first assignment. It forced them to use ChatGPT, forced them to use it to come up with startup ideation and think about experiments, think about the methodology of the course, but also to be critical about, can I come up with original ideas, can I come up with, novel, concepts, as Martin Searle suggested today or queried today. Now I'm thinking about it in this way, which is create a co-founder. And have that co-founder become a domain expert in whatever domain you pick. So pick a domain of interest, and then train the AI or ask the AI to become an expert, a domain expert in that area of interest, and then pick a user persona and ask the AI to be an expert in that user persona, and then do customer discovery, follow me home, like deep customer discovery, needs analysis, requirements analysis with the help of your AI co-founder and AI user persona, then create some mock-ups and some prototypes. And then of course, when you're done with all that, like reflect on the experience and what'd you learn, what are the weaknesses, what are the strengths. So I think, to your question, I think where we're heading is training the students to be architects and users of the tools, and to be expert utilizers of the tools, much like they're expert utilizers of laptops and the phones. And I think this point about will they, I'm not an accounting professor. I operate in a non-deterministic world, in the world of startups. So I don't believe the AI can answer the question perfectly, because I don't think anyone can answer the question perfectly about what go-to-market choice should a founder make when they're trying to go from 0 to 1. That's a not knowable question, even with the data that we provide them in the case. But that's a debate that illuminates why you make certain go-to-market choices under certain circumstances. They can't decide what's the right amount of money to raise deterministically. That's a non-deterministic question. But we can look at the projections, and we can talk about trade-offs and dilution, and cap tables, But I think that's sort of where we're heading, is pushing the students to use the tools.
Well, if I can just push that a little bit,
Yeah,
are we looking at a potential collapse of the case method here, though, if you have essentially, bots available to everyone that can at least, to a certain extent, get to that point that we try to get to with the case method generally, with the first 2/3, where you're getting all the issues on the table and you're kind of shaping those issues a little bit. It feels like there's a risk there.
Or there's an opportunity there that you're not getting to a more in-depth conversation.
Right, or maybe there's a way to accelerate that.
That's how I'm looking at it. Time will tell. I'm very humble in that I have no idea how this is going to evolve each semester. But that's how I'm looking at it. That's at least the experience I've had so far, was that it got to the depth of the issues faster. And it accelerated our students' prep maybe more effectively, I expect.
Two things. First, I'm not sure if you know Jack Hillan, this research on this, because my startup actually partnered with her on this, but to answer that question, so we actually build pretty identical thing like you, but in different use case. But what we do is, for example, we use in career development and recruitment. So yeah, like career coach will keep answering this. Yeah, AI might know a lot, but then we evaluate all the answer using that, and then to train this, and then to more like peer learning. So that way it's actually the value add. So you give AI wouldn't know everything, but then it's pretty good. But then when you have submission, because we keep seeing score like 90, 95, and then keep going, and then we just train them all together, and then give feedback to everyone, and then they continue to learn from each other. That's our solution to continue to be relevant.
Yeah, it's actually interesting. I'm reading David Brooks' recent book about how to see someone. Have anybody read this book yet? You read it? You know this book?
Half of it.
You read half of it?
I have a 2-year-old, so.
Hard to read. Yeah. So one of the things I was really struck by in this book is, I'm about halfway through to it as well, so I don't have the full picture yet. But this notion of what's really human is the way you relate to someone, and develop these peer relationships and coaching relationships and mentorship relationships, and teamwork and collaboration. And I think as a school, we're going to have to really lean into that work, because the AI is not going to be able to replace that, right? That's the thing that's really special about forming organizations and forming units and productive collaboration. Yeah.
Like you did, I also attended a consulting firm to learn some PowerPoint for some time. And I was just curious, the advancements, which are very short term so far, in the learning environment have been tremendous. I wonder if they have been similar on the advisory side, if you had any exposure there. You look at the hypothesis-driven approach that McKinsey's, BCG's, and Bain's seem to have. They go with the partner group saying, there's probably 3 approaches, let's try to evaluate those 3 and come with a hypothesis-driven way of refuting the other 2 to see if the one that's left is the best one. And this is more of a stochastic methodology of finding the answer. That's very hard to implement in industry and advisory. So I'm curious if you've seen, some trends in advisory where the client interaction becomes more stochastic as opposed to
It's so interesting. It's not my field, but in my investment activities, I've been investing in and evaluating a lot of AI for blank industry. So I invested in AI in legal, and AI in accounting, and AI in financial reporting and analysis, and AI in consulting, a couple of AI in consulting companies. And almost all of them, my conclusion is that we've hit peak consulting employment. Right? The consulting firms are going to start being way more efficient with the AI. And just like Martin Sorrell today said, 25-year-old media planners, we don't need 50,000 of them anymore. It's just hard to imagine we need 50,000 25-year-old consultants to do this market research and analysis and generate slides. So there may still be the need for the strategic most thinking, or the people who can use the tools to be very strategic. But I just don't know if we're going to have the same churning of data and analysis and slides that we've had historically. I just can't imagine that that's a winning solution. Yeah.
I had a question more about the classroom and also about young professionals. So some of the research shows that when you use AI, when students use AI, they don't retain the information as long. So I teach and I try to get them to do DCS. I get them to do 2U DCS and project out and do it by hand because I don't want them to use this IRR function and not know what they're doing. But how do you motivate students? And a lot of them say, well, when am I ever going to do this? I can always prepare. And I tell them I'm always in investment committee meetings and I have to come up with ideas on the spot. But if we move into more of this world, how do you motivate your students to actually know anything other than, prompts?
Yeah, it's a great question. Do you teach the case method as well?
At the business school, I do case, and outside the business school, at the climate school, I do my own thing.
Because one of the things I found is that the thing that motivates our students the most is, what would you guess, is the most motivating thing in the HBS classroom?
Winning.
Interactions.
Winning and
Interactions.
Yeah, and interactions and not looking stupid in front of their peers. Like, in fact, I forgot to mention this, but I told you that there are 2 ways to interact with ChatLTV. There's the public and the private. What % do you think chose to do private versus public? 95% private. So the way, at least I operate in the classroom, is that I put them on the spot. I mean, we have the cold call method, and I do multiple cold calls over the course of a conversation, over a case discussion, because I want to put the students on the spot, and they can't have the bot answer the question. You know what I mean? Like I have to, like, okay, we got the answer you got. Why'd you get that answer? Walk me through your calculation. Like exactly. What's your churn rate? What's the 1 over churn? Math. What'd you assume for your blah blah blah. So, at least in my experience with the case method, is you can put the students on the spot, and their motivation is they don't want to look stupid in front of their peers.
Is there an ethical question in terms of you getting look at the questions that they've asked and so on and so forth, and then kind of like, because that must color your impression of what they're doing. So it's kind of like
I told them that I'll see what they ask of the bot, so they knew that was they knew that if they asked the bot a question, I would see it.
And that doesn't sort of prevent people.
I didn't have a single
being
person.
candid or anything.
I didn't have a single student complain about it.
An extension to her question, actually, I've been curious that if people don't do that unit work, how do they progress to the upper levels? So if you don't have that 9-level consultant, you don't have a junior engineer who writes code because it's generated, or the media planner, that sort of function. Like, how do people eventually progress to that strategic decision-making mindset?
That's a really great question. I don't know if I have an answer for that. That's a great question. Yeah. Oh, yeah, please.
Thank you. Thanks. What is
Were you going to answer that question?
No.
Oh. I was excited.
Yeah. What is the feedback mechanism? So I imagine that each semester you're putting the additional papers or responses in, but is there a human feedback mechanism that says, okay, here's the evaluation I got. I agree with all these points except for this one, or kind of what's that process?
I didn't evaluate each of the responses for each student. I spot checked. I did sort of sampling, but I didn't have the bandwidth.
And is there sort of generally for custom GPTs, is there a sort of mechanism by which you can get humans to give that feedback? And
there's an evaluator. There are a lot of automatic evaluators that are now being created. So you have one model generate the response, and then you have another model evaluate the response. So that's the architecture now being put in place for the new tutor bot that we're creating. So that's a way of trying to improve quality a little bit. But it does still take, like you're saying, like some human intervention, and I spot it.
Yep.
Touched on that beyond again. Now one tool. So for that, earlier I mentioned we retrain this. We actually tested one thing for the other answer. Then we let other user voluntary to give like a rating feedback. So we are still trying that one. So not sure how. So it's still clear things. But then for the use of this, right? So what we are seeing, I think at the end of the day, it's motivation and need basis. Because our use case is career development. We have thousands of students from 10 countries are using it, and it's like those who are really hungry about getting something, they will like work harder. And then those, for example, if I'm taking finance courses, if I don't want to be an investment banker, I just want to, it's just core course. I'm just going to get rid of it. I think its chances I'm just not going to bother. But if I know I'm going to get an investment banking interview after graduation, then chances probably I need to know. So I think that at least that's our conclusion on like a motivation basis.
Yeah, on the motivation to be more strategic. So yeah, that's there.
You know, we know that we all learn through feedback, right? And what I'm interested in the opportunity here is that you gave your students way more feedback than they had ever had before if you use this after each cycle of their assignments.
Every week.
Did you notice a change in like quality of learning lift over the course of the semester?
Yeah.
Because I think that is at least one of the benefits that counterbalances this loss of the apprenticeship method that we're all talking about.
Yeah, I thought my students in the venture capital class where I did the weekly feedback, by the end of the semester were like way ahead of where previous year's students had been.
That's so interesting.
Now, it may be that they were just a better crop students, I don't know.
Right, there's variation.
As they get more sophisticated, but I thought they were way ahead in their level of sophistication.
Really interesting.
We have time for one more question before we got to wrap.
No, sorry, I missed the part when you said how to get the source content. It should be the Word document or HTML or PDF or
any one of those. Any one of those. Go to customgpt.com and you'll see how to do it.
Okay. Thank you. And is the architecture proprietary that you had, or can we take a picture? I missed it.
It's proprietary, so maybe when HBS releases the tutor bot. And
no, that's fine.
Yeah,
sorry, I didn't mean to take it.
Yeah, I was just sharing it as a learning community. So, yeah. Well, I'm happy to stick around and answer more questions. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you. Very exciting.
Thank you.